August 1, 1980. A group of divers entered an underwater cave in Georgia. Not all of them could return. One, in pursuit of exploration beyond a tight restriction, would strip off safety equipment and become wedged in a fissure near the entrance. Would he die, or would he survive? The afternoon in Chattooga County, Georgia, was sweltering. Early August, summer heat advancing toward the hills. Ron Langston stood at Armuchee Creek Spring with his dive buddies, preparing to explore the underwater cave system that formed the source of the creek. Langston was 33 years old. He was certified with the National Association of Underwater Instructors and the YMCA. He had proper training, equipment, and experience. But sometimes experience doesn't prevent bad decisions. And on August 1, 1980, Ron Langston would make multiple decisions that would cost him his life. This is Spooky Nightmare. Here, stories are told not to scare, but to remind. Armuchee Creek Spring is a natural spring in northwest Georgia. The spring emerges from underground passages carved from limestone over thousands of years. Clear water flows from the cave entrance, forming the beginning of Armuchee Creek. For cave divers, it offered the opportunity to explore passages few people could see. It required advanced skill to go into narrow areas where the rock constricted and the cave extended into darkness, deeper. Langston and his friends came with scuba equipment, tanks, regulators, lights, and all the equipment necessary for underwater exploration. Then they entered the water and began diving into the cave system. Initially, everything looked good. The passages wound through the rock, the water was clear, the divers' lights illuminated the limestone walls. They advanced deeper into the system, following passages that led toward the mountain. And then they reached a restriction, a place where the passage narrowed significantly, the kind of place where a diver with full cave diving equipment, tanks, harness, backup systems, couldn't fit through. But Langston could see that beyond the restriction, the cave continued, and he thought there were more passages to explore, more cave to see. And he wanted to know what was beyond that narrow point. So he made a decision. He would remove his normal diving equipment. He would strip down to minimal equipment and pass through the restriction with a pony bottle, a small auxiliary tank with just a few minutes of breathing gas. His dive partners watched Langston remove his main equipment and immediately understood what he was planning. They knew it was risky, and they tried to attach a safety line to him, a lifeline that would help them track his position and pull him back if something went wrong. But Langston didn't wait for them to attach the line. Why he did such a thing is not exactly known. He went through the restriction before his dive partners had a chance to secure the safety line to him. He went alone, with minimal air, without a guideline, without any way for his friends to know where he was or help him if something went wrong. His partners waited at the restriction and watched for lights. They waited for Langston to return. But minutes passed, and the small pony bottle he carried contained a very limited air source. It would take just a few minutes for the air inside the bottle to run out. They waited more than minutes, but Langston didn't return. His friends waited longer, hoping to see his light, hear sounds, find any sign he was on his way back, but there was nothing. So if you were in their shoes, would you go after your friend to rescue him, or would you try to surface and call for help? And yes, they faced such a critical decision. They could try to follow him through the restriction without equipment, but that would put them in the same dangerous situation. They could wait longer, but their own air supplies were also limited. Finally, they made the difficult decision to leave the cave and notify authorities. They surfaced and immediately called for help. Before we get into the next part, I want to show you something quick. According to the channel statistics, over 90% of people watching this video are not subscribed. If you enjoy these real cave incident stories, subscribing and liking really helps support the continuation of this content. Now, let's get into the next part. The Floyd County Rescue Unit mobilized. They reached the cave at 7:30 p.m. that evening. Local divers entered the water and assessed the situation, but they quickly realized this was beyond their own capabilities. The cave system was complex, the restriction was technical, and recovering Langston, alive or dead, required specialized skills and experience. They called in experienced cave divers from Atlanta. A team assembled and was sent to Armuchee Creek Spring. These divers had the training, equipment, and experience necessary to dive in challenging conditions. The recovery team entered the cave. They advanced through dark and narrow passages, approaching the restriction where Langston had disappeared. They carefully searched the area, checking every possible location. They found him wedged in a fissure near the entrance area, not in the depths of the cave system, not far beyond the restriction. Near the entrance, near where he entered, near safety, near his friends. But he was stuck. His body was wedged in a fissure in the rock, positioned so tightly that the rescue team couldn't simply pull him out. They had to use tools. Hand tools were brought into the cave to work carefully around the body, to widen the surrounding rock to create enough space to extract him. The recovery took hours. Working underwater in a cave with limited visibility, using tools to modify the rock formation, being careful to avoid causing a collapse or getting stuck themselves increased the time. Finally, they managed to remove Ron Langston's body from the fissure where he died. Contemporary cave diving analysts examining the accident painted a likely picture of what probably happened. Langston had passed through the restriction with the pony bottle. He'd explored beyond the narrow point with a limited air source, and at some point he realized his air was running out. He must have felt the increasing resistance while trying to breathe, the undeniable sign that the tank was depleting, the knowledge that he had minutes, perhaps less, before the breathable air was completely gone. Stress and air depletion probably impaired his judgment. In the urgency of the moment, without limited visibility and reference points, he may have lost his orientation and lost track of which direction led out. The fissure where he was found was near the entrance. Investigators suggested he may have misinterpreted the fissure as a proper exit route and tried to pass through it, believing it would lead to his friends. But it wasn't the entrance. It was just a fissure in the rock. And when he tried to pass through, he became stuck. With his air source depleted, his body wedged in a position from which he couldn't free himself, Ron Langston died in that fissure. The tragedy of Ron Langston's death extends beyond the immediate circumstances of the accident. It points to a pattern that cave diving experts have documented for years. In reports on similar accidents, analysts noted that many deaths appear to be attributable to sudden impulses that violate one or more common sense and safety rules. The question posed was direct. A natural sequence of conditions does not kill them. Rather, they appear to create their own fatal sequence of conditions. Why? This question has troubled cave diving safety experts for decades. Ron Langston was trained and certified by two different organizations. He knew dive safety. He understood the risks of cave diving. Yet when faced with a tight restriction and the allure of seeing what was beyond, he made a series of decisions that violated basic safety protocols. First and most importantly, he removed his diving equipment, leaving himself with minimal air supply. He carried only a pony bottle with minutes of breathing gas, absolutely inadequate for exploration in an unknown cave passage. He advanced before his dive partners could attach a safety line. He eliminated any way for them to track his position or help in an emergency. He essentially converted a team dive into a solo dive in one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. Each of these decisions individually increased the risk of death. Combined, they created a situation where survival was nearly impossible, and in cave diving, things rarely go perfectly. Remember, caves don't forgive. The restriction itself wasn't necessarily fatal. Many cave divers have successfully passed through such narrow passages, but they did so with proper planning, adequate air supply, safety lines, and backup systems. Langston had none of these. He had a moment of curiosity, a desire to see what was beyond that narrow point, and the wrong moves he made to satisfy that curiosity. The psychological factors that lead experienced divers to make such decisions are complex. There's the allure of exploration, the desire to discover what's beyond known passages. There's overconfidence from previous successful dives. There's the social dynamics of diving with friends. But cave diving safety rules exist precisely because these allures are deadly. The rules aren't arbitrary restrictions designed to limit exploration. I know what happens to divers who don't follow the rules, and you know too. There are dozens of videos on my channel about this subject. A safety line could have helped Langston's friends track his position and guide him back when his air ran low. Adequate air supply would have given him time to explore and return safely, or at least time to solve problems when he lost his orientation. Proper equipment redundancy would have provided backup systems that could have saved his life when the primary system proved inadequate. Was it the restriction that seemed to demand he strip his equipment, or was that restriction the cave saying, "This isn't for you today"? It was clearly obvious that exploration beyond that point required different planning, different equipment, different preparation. Langston's death occurred near the entrance. Recovery divers found him close to where he entered the cave. If he'd maintained his orientation, if he'd stayed calm, if he'd followed the standard rule, quote 3, he could have made it. But stress and disorientation in an underwater cave are killers. Once you've lost your sense of direction, after your breathing has accelerated and your air depletes faster, after stress has clouded your judgment, the cave becomes an inescapable labyrinth. Armuchee Creek Spring is still open today. Water still flows from the cave entrance. Passages still extend toward the mountain. The restriction Langston tried to pass is still there, still narrow, still separating unexplored passages from explored ones. Cave diving experts examine accidents like Langston's not to judge the dead, but to understand what leads experienced, trained divers to make fatal decisions. The goal is to save future lives by learning from past deaths. The pattern identified in Langston's case, the sudden impulse that overrides safety training, has been documented in countless other cave diving deaths. Ron Langston entered Armuchee Creek Spring on August 1st, 1980, with training, certification, and friends. He had sufficient knowledge and tools to dive safely. He died wedged in a fissure near the entrance because he chose to strip off safety equipment, carry inadequate air supply, proceed without a safety line, and separate from his team to pursue exploration beyond a tight restriction. His decisions created the fatal conditions: minutes of air in a pony bottle, no safety line, no redundancy, no team support, only the desire to see what was beyond that narrow point. And wedged in a fissure in the rock near the entrance of Armuchee Creek Spring, Ron Langston paid for these decisions with his life. Ron Langston's death showed how mistakes play out in caves: wrong decisions, wrong priorities, and conscious risks. The outcome was inevitable. But caves don't always wait for mistakes. Sometimes inexperience is enough. Sometimes nature suddenly turns everything upside down without any warning. In the spring of 1977 in Missouri, 4 young people entered Indian Creek Caverns for an exploration. They weren't diving, they weren't wearing technical equipment, they had no perception of danger. When they were just a few hundred meters inside, the weather outside suddenly completely reversed. This incident is an indicator of what happens when unpreparedness and a sudden flash flood combine in the same place. But this incident will be a guest in our next video. That's all for now.